This is called smørrebrød. It's a very traditional Danish dish consisting of an inconspicuous thin slice of dark rye bread on the stack of other stuff, which is actually really the taste of the dish. This is a story about the rye, this rye bread, and about harvest, and about how we can actually see animism in some of the most common everyday-like aspects of our life when we just scratch the surface a bit of a completely common thing like bread. We sometimes find these aspects of animist traditional knowledge. My name is Rune Hjarnø Rasmussen. I'm a historian of religion. I'm working on Nordic Animist knowledge, and if you appreciate my attempts to make majority animist knowledge available with cutting edge anthropology, then consider Patreon supporting me. Right. So this rye bread, which is a common staple in southern Scandinavia and I think parts of Germany, is still today an important staple of Danish food. I think I've eaten it almost every single day of my childhood and upbringing, and it's just this immensely important staple food in people's lives. It's very nutritional. I think it's a little bit of an acquired taste, sort of bitterish and dense. But in animist worldviews, it's like this. The organism that feeds people takes an incredibly important role. Among the Sami you have the reindeer, among the Maya you have the maize, among the Yoruba you have the yam, among the Inuit you have seals, among the Dakota you have the American bison, and so on. These are life-giving organisms, and they are in a sense divine because they give us life. And among the people in northern Germany, southern Scandinavia, the rye has had this role as a sustainer of life for ever. Very, very old piece of culture. This is a living being, the rye plant, basically, that gives us life. So there used to be these extensive and complex technologies surrounding the cultivation and the harvesting of this plant, the rye. Also around other crops, by the way, but in southern Scandinavia, particularly the rye. The sowing was ritualized as sacred bread would be eaten while sowing or perhaps given to the earth, and the growth would be supported by prayers to thunder, for thunder to come and ripen the crops, and the harvest was a long, intensely ritualized process filled with taboos and games and all kinds of folklore. Sometimes people would leave a small corner of the field for the wild hunt or for an elf king or perhaps for Odin or something like that. There was a ritual for bringing in the first sheaf, sometimes for bringing in the last sheaf, and a bit like the Maya, who see the maize as a deity, the Northern Europeans used to build these corn dollies, I believe they're called in English, kind of a corn deity out of these sheaves. This is a way of producing the crop deity as an object for cult. He or she could then be adorned or worshipped in many ways. A case I particularly like is that a masculine corn deity was brought to the lady of the house, who would then have a symbolic intercourse with this masculine corn dolly, and that it would then be transformed into a bread that she would ritually give birth to, and it would be dispersed among the harvest workers. So you see there's kind of a cult drama where the woman of the house almost enacts a kind of Mother Earth role. And this sexual aspect of relating to the earth is, I think, quite characteristic of Nordic animism. You find it even in Christian formula, like in the English ritual called the Akerbod, where Mother Earth is addressed monumentally. It says, "Hail to you, field, the people's mother, be thou growing in the embrace of God, food filled for the people to enjoy." Notice that God, I guess the Christian God, is actually having sex with the fields in this formula. It's a ritualization of God having sex with the earth. But generally I think this cult of the crop is characterized by transformation. The purpose is to birth and proper ripening of the deity, and humans participate in these transformations throughout the year. These life-giving transformations from seed to corn, from corn to flour, to bread and beer. These stages and this almost animist alchemy goes on throughout the year. And these sheaves, for instance, could be saved for the Yule period and transformed into a Yule goat costume, perhaps, or they could be given to the wild hunt, or they could be used to make these specific sacred Yule breads. And these breads would then have to be on the Yule altar, perhaps with sowing seeds from the coming season strewn around them, or Christmas candles would have to shine on them. So they would almost absorb the light of Yule, which is of course linked to the returning of light. And then the bread would be brought on and perhaps given to the earth while sowing, as I mentioned before. Beer, it could also be used for beer. Specific Yule beer could be made out of a last sheaf transforming the bounty of the land into the spirit of celebration that would enliven the world in the darkest time of year, when of course when the land is dead and must be brought back to life somehow. So these kind of cyclical transformations of life essences are really central, I think, to Nordic Animism. And this, by the way, is the kind of stuff that I'm communicating quite a lot about in the Runic Animist calendar, which you can order from my page, which is somewhere here. But yeah, it's a note how incredibly intense the connection to the land was in traditional agricultural society. We're talking about human physical processes like making love to the earth as a divine being, and the whole year basically being involved in participating in these natural processes and transformations. However, in the 19th century, something happened. Industrialization. And that meant that a lot of this very intense relation making was severed or somehow lost. In the 19th century, a lot of peasants moved into the big cities and became workers. And this change was really hard on people. Now, the Maya in Guatemala, they have a saying that you only get really full from eating the maize from your own village. So even today, where some of the Maya live in big cities and work as software engineers and whatnot, they will sometimes go back and get some maize from the village that they come from. They feel a bit ruptured from the earth, and they need to hold on to that connection a little bit. And there are also cases, by the way, where this rupture from traditional livelihood has really tragic consequences for indigenous peoples. They experience a quite intense hardship. Cultural and social problems emerge when people are severed from the land and from those organisms that used to give them life, be that maize, seals, American buffalo, whatever. And exactly something of that sort you actually see, or something comparable, with the industrialization in Northern Europe. Because when people move into big cities, there's a lot of social problems of exactly that kind that emerged. When Northern European peasants moved to big cities and became workers, there was rampant alcoholism, social problems, domestic violence, gambling, and extremism. And I mean, of course, we didn't experience racism, and I think the land theft would probably have been capitalist, and to some extent, at least, I think it was countered because, at least here, we were blessed with some very competent cooperative movements who very pragmatically kept the means of production in the hands of the people, as I think Marx would have said it, and thereby avoided at least the most rampant capitalist exploitation, at least of the rural population. But anyway, the cities in the late 19th century were characterized by abject poverty. And one very widespread strategy was, curiously, it was a huge movement for allotment gardening. Tiny gardens with little houses emerged in a large belt around cities such as Copenhagen. It's basically following the same logic as the Maya idea that you only get truly full by food that comes from your own earth. So with this allotment gardens, people were able to have a bit of connection to the earth, grow a bit of plants and get some nutrients, some fresh greens and so on. And I don't know so much about this phenomenon internationally, but in Scandinavia at least it was a really big thing. It also expresses some sort of longing back towards a time where our life was something that we received as a divine gift in, interaction with the earth. And there is a romanticism in this perspective, a bit of a nostalgic longing for a lost time or something like that. And this exactly is a feeling that scholars generally have a strong resilience against. Scholars sometimes seem to suspect that there's something inherently fascist about romanticism, which is a weirdly superficial and I think totally incorrect thing. I think the reason is that romanticism does hold a critique of modernity, and scholarship often has a strong modernist bias, but romanticism itself is not fascist just because specific fascists were romanticists, you know, like Julius Evola and Hitler. But romanticist thinking can actually be really progressive and emancipatory. If you see the American Culturalist School of Anthropology as an example, a really good example of this. And conversely, modernism can indeed also be very fascist. I think a number of the decidedly modernist communist leaders of the 20th century, like Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot, were some of the biggest mass murderers of our age, basically, and they were certainly modernist. I think romanticism is a reaction to modernity, and particularly to the separation that modernity implements, for instance, between humanity and other organisms that sustain our lives. Romanticism expresses a longing for this lost relation, and in that sense, romanticism is not a solution. It's just a longing, and it might even, like reveling in that longing, might even push things away a little bit. Animism is a solution, I think we have to be wary about nostalgia when we produce animism, exactly because of this sort of almost cult of the distant. The purpose is not that things should be different; they should be close. But yeah, romanticism is a kind of an emotional recognition that something has gone somehow away. So I'll play a little song for you in this video by the 19th century, I think it would be very fair to call him a social justice warrior, named Jeppe Aakjær, who portrayed this exact animist cycle of the Rye in his work from 1906 called The Songs of the Rye. And here is a songwriter called Thomas, or a singer called Thomas Kellerup, performing the song in which Aakjær nostalgically remembers from his childhood the most sacred moment during harvest time, which is that where the rye was brought in. Yeah, thanks for listening and see you around.
Nu det længe siden, men end det gemmes i mit sind. Hvordan i barndomstiden den kære ro kom ind. Hvordan den skærne tunge top ved moders svage kræfter blev lagt i luen op. Først bredte mor et klæde, så ømt som nogen højtidsstue. Der måtte ingen træde med sko i høstens ro. Så fejede hun med limens rest hvert snavset strå til side, som for en hædersgæst. Den kære ro var gæsten, der gjorde hvert et barn så spændt. Se far han lægger vesten og ser så indadvendt. En skælven i et ydmygt sind, en bøn til altets skaber, før havlen bringes seng. Og ned forsvinder og bliver under bjælken sat. Se far for røde kinder og spindelvæv om hat. Men mor er lige hvid og bleg, hvor meget tunen stræber. med ruens tunge i. Det går mod aftentide, snart skinner månen fuld og rund, på gavl og vægge hvide, og ned i vognens bund. Mor standser træt og titter ind, far kommer hen til lugen, klapper hendes kind. Og barnet, som har løbet sig træt i dagens muntre leg, det er nu stille krøbet ind under juletid. Der høres dette skarpe knald fra vognens fjeld mod sandet af ørnsvistens fald. Og mellem juletider går stjerneblink og måneskin, og milde vinde viger, mens barnet slumrer ind. Så slutter far i Jesu navn, og hjemmet går til hvile.